Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Helen Gray and I'm the Clerk for Development Plan Panel this afternoon. We have received apologies from the Chair, so the first item of business this afternoon is to elect a Chair from our number.
Can I propose Councillor Kane?
Could I take nominations and seconders for the Chair, please?
Who do you propose now? Next to me. Sorry. Right, I'll put my stern face on then. Can I propose Councillor Kyle? Not here. He's not here, is he? No. Oh, sorry.
I expect you mean Councillor Ray.
You mean Councillor Ray? I do mean Councillor Ray, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Is there a seconder for Councillor Ray, please?
How forgettable Councillor Ray.
Thank you very much, Councillor Price. So Councillor Ray is duly elected Chair of the meeting.
Where did you come from?
It's a surprise.
There we go.
I'm leaving now.
Forgive me, Councillor Ray. We were talking about buses, and Councillor Kyle came into my head.
It happens. Good morning, everyone. Afternoon, is it? Oh God, yeah. That's why I've got a coffee. We don't know who's chair. I'd like to welcome. We'll get to it. Too much frivolity for a planning meeting. You're all far too excitable. You can tell it's election season. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Development Plans Panel. My name is Councillor Paul Ray. As you can see, I'm not Councillor Maloney, and I will be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being live streamed on the Leeds City Council YouTube channel so that members of the public can observe the meeting without the need to be present. But just before I invite members to introduce themselves, I believe it's a certain councillor's last Development Plans Panel. Oh, after an amazing 27 years of service to the council, Councillor Anderson, it's fair to say that you've had many a strong opinion on this panel over the years, to the interest of all of us. So I think we all a quick round of applause for his 27 years of service. Now we've got the niceties out of the way, you can go back to saying how everything is wrong. Right, could I invite members of the officers to introduce themselves? I meant in a jovial way. Your insights are always good. Could I invite members and officers to introduce themselves? If we could start from my left, please.
Good afternoon. Caroline Harris, Principal Planner, Sites and Policies Team.
Good afternoon. Paul Bingham, Team Leader in Strategic Planning.
Afternoon. Jason Hammond, Senior Planning Policy Officer.
Good afternoon, Catherine Holloway, Team Leader for Sites and Policies and Strategic Planning.
Good afternoon everybody, I'm Councillor Mary Harland from the Kippix and Methley Ward.
Good afternoon everyone, Javid Akhtar, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jonathan Pryor, Heading Lane Hyde Park Ward and Deputy Leader.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jules Hesselwood, representing Wheatwood Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carlin Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Penny Stables, Wetherby Ward.
Hello, I'm Robert Finnegan, I'm a councillor for the Morley North Ward.
Good afternoon everybody, Councillor Alan Lamb, also from Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Colin Campbell, and can I echo your comments in relation to Councillor Anderson, who's sat next to me through quite a lot of these meetings. And I think generally we've been positive, and generally I think the committee's worked well with him on board, and I shall miss him.
Thank you. Councillor Perry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward, for the moment.
I'm Helen Gray, the Clerk for this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Philippa Plumtree Valley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to panel today.
Hello, Martin Elliott, Head of Strategic Planning.
Thank you very much for that. Could I now ask the Clerk to go through agenda item number 1 to 5, please?
Thank you, Chair. There are no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no exempt information included in the agenda. Item 3, late items. We've got no formal late items of business added to the agenda. Item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests that they may have?
I'm a member of Morley Town Council's Planning Committee.
Thank you. Under agenda item 5, we received apologies for absence from the Chair, Councillor Maloney, and from the Chief Planning Officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Item number 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 27th of January 2026. Do members accept these minutes to be a true and correct record? I'll take that. Yeah, silence. Excellent. And matters arising. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that the response to the National Planning Policy Framework consultation, which was discussed in brief at the last meeting and then circulated to members of this panel, subsequently received some comment from panel members, was updated and was forwarded to the Secretary of State within the time frame. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other matters arising before we proceed on to the rest of the agenda? No, perfect. Item number 7, Leeds Local Plan Work Programme update. Could I ask the officers to provide an update, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this item provides an update on the 2026 work programme for the Leeds Local Plan and focuses today on the approach to 2 key consultations that we'll be undertaking later this year under the new system for plan making, and also provides some updates on work to confirm site availability and refine the site assessment methodology. The regulations for the new plan making system, which we talked about with DPP back in January, were published the day before this report was finalised, and following some further reflection and legal advice, there's a proposed amendment to recommendation B, but I think it'll probably make more sense to you if I go through the report first and then we'll sort of loop back to that before we break for questions, if that's all right. So just as a bit of a recap then, so as we discussed back in January, the government's making various reforms to the planning system, and as part of that is changing the way in which local authorities bring forward local plans for its area. And the intention is that the Leeds local plan will be pivoting to the new plan making system, primarily because it offers more timetable flexibility. If you're progressing plans under the current system, you'd have to submit them by December this year, which would be very tight for us and could tell what we could do in terms of meaningful engagement with communities. But there's also benefits in terms of it sets out a series of gateway checks through the plan making process, which I think will help to de-risk the process. It gives us more ability to align with the new National Planning Policy Framework, which was published for consultation earlier this year, but we're still awaiting that being finalised. And there's also an opportunity to sort of better reflect understanding of what the proposals are for the South Bank and the sort of Newtown Task Force and what their recommendations are. So then in terms of the work programme, I think it was really clear from the discussion that we had with DPP in January that panel members, much like officers, think it's vital that the sort of technical regulatory change that we're going through from this pivot to the system doesn't undermine the significant time and effort that's been spent by local communities engaging in the plan to date. And we need to really minimise any sort of risk that this change could have in terms of causing confusion and frustration about the process, and also be really clear that all of the comments that we've received to date on the local plan, particularly through the last consultation we did in the summer on the issues and options, will still continue to have the same level of weight and will still continue to shape and inform the plan in the same way. So it really is a sort of technical change, which as planners it's of interest, but probably for most members of the public less so. So the new plan making process, much like the old one, is sort of requires that we prepare the plan across a number of sequential stages, and we're going to progress through a number of those stages this year. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to publish what's called a notice of intent to commence plan making, which is really just a simple statement. It's half a side of A4, which makes clear that the authority is preparing a new plan in accordance with the new plan making regulations, and it will be accompanied by a timetable which sets out the estimated timescales for each stage in the process. And the regulations require that both of those are published on the council's website, and that the timetable, once it's published, needs to be reviewed on so it's kept up to date. So I guess so people can be very clear that Leeds is preparing a local plan, and these are the timescales that we're working towards. With that in place, then the next stage would be to undertake a scoping consultation. And it's proposed that we take a sort of streamlined and focused approach to that consultation over the summer, which would be in the form of a short, simple document which simply outlines what the plan is, the topics in headline that it will address, and how people will be able to get involved. in preparing the plan. And it's proposed that we'd publish that for a 4-week consultation period, and there'd be a simple response form that people could use to feedback comments on that sort of headline scope and approach. And the purpose of that is really to make sure that we meet the regulatory requirements in terms of that we have to undertake a consultation on the scope, but we also minimise confusion and allow quick progression to the substantive consultation on sites and policy options later in the year. Because I think what we can do as part of that consultation, we can very clearly signpost to the plan content and evidence consultation that will take place later in the year, recognising that many of those who engaged in the summer consultation on the issues and options may be likely to be more interested in how their comments have helped shape the plan, how the approach that we're taking to specific topics and the approach that we're taking to sites, rather than sort of going back and revisiting the headlines of what this plan will be covering. The next step after that would be Gateway 1. So this is one of the sort of 3 gateway tests set out in the new plan making system, but this one's just a self-assessment of readiness for plan making. So it's relatively straightforward looking at it. I think it's covering matters such as, do we have the governance processes in place to prepare a plan? Do we have arrangements for how we would consider responses to consultation and so on? So it's the sort of stuff which, as officers in preparing the plan, we've got a lot of this in our project management anyway, but it's just setting that out in the document, and we publish that on the website. So the self-assessment needs to be completed, it needs to be published, it needs to be submitted to CLD, but it's not, unlike the later 2 gateway stages, it's not sort of marked or subject to formal feedback. It is purely a self-assessment of our readiness to commence the plan. Following that, the major step would be what's now called the plan content and evidence consultation, and that's what we'd be looking to do towards the winter time. And this would be a major consultation, so it would be covering the vision, what's now called the measurable outcomes, which is effectively the objectives for the plan. It would sort of take us forward in terms of preferred policy approaches, so take from what we had in the consultation last year, where we identifying what the issues were and what some of the options are. It's sort of taking this forward and presenting preferred policy approaches with draft policies to accompany that. We'd also have alongside that updated site assessments and with sort of new RAG ratings for the sites and the sort of evidence base that's been gathered to support the plan. So this consultation will build on the consultation that we did last summer on the issues and options, and it will be shaped by the comments and responses received to that consultation, but clearly still is an early stage in the plan making process, so if anyone's got additional comments, they can meaningfully do so through that consultation. And as part of that, the intention would be that we'd publish updated maps and schedules of sites, which would be based on revised assessments of the site's availability and suitability. And proposing that as part of that, we'd sort of make a distinction between sites which were clearly preferred, which were marginally preferred, which are marginal emissions, and which were clear emissions. So being sort of giving an indication of where the evidence is taking us, but there's still options there, and particularly in places where there's more site options that are potentially suitable, there's pros and cons, seeking public feedback and views on those before we reach a decision on a sort of final draft plan, which then sort of would show what the proposed allocations were. So it enabled people to understand the emerging approach of the plan and express preferences between site options. And as with the previous issues and options consultation, the intention would be that the approach to that consultation would exceed the minimum requirements of our statement of community involvement. Whilst clearly we do need to make effective use of the council's resources, but there would be extensive web-based material as well as face-to-face events where members of the public can come along to speak to officers about what the plan means for where they live and how they can get involved. So I think they're the key stages that the plan will go through in terms of the plan making process this year. Clearly after that there'll be further stages, but in terms of what we're doing this year, they're the sort of key milestones that we're aiming to meet. But move on then. So in the report we also provide a bit of an update on site availability. So there's significant work going on amongst the team at the moment to refine the assessment of potential sites to feed into that plan content and evidence consultation, and assuring that sites are genuinely available is essential part of that, because the plan, there's no point in allocating a site which isn't available because it's not going to be developed, it's not going to help meet the needs that it was intended to. So, and we know that potential sites have been identified for the plan through a number of sources, including through the call for sites, as well as sort of an urban capacity study that we've done internally. And we know that sites haven't always been put forward with the knowledge or support of the landowner, or in some cases the landowner may have changed their position. They may have changed their mind and no longer want a site to be considered. So within this report, there's a partial update based on this work, which is focused on sites which are in council ownership. And it confirms that 15 council-owned sites which were consulted on as part of the issues and options have now been confirmed to be not available and are withdrawn from consideration through the local plan process. And they're set out in a table in the report. It's under paragraph 14. And work is still ongoing to assess the availability of all other non-council owned sites. And that is taking into account the representations that were received through the consultation, including we had a number of instances where, for example, developers have put forward a site, but it maybe clipped someone's private garden land or land outside of their ownership. And we've had representations to the consultation to make clear that the landowner doesn't want that part of the site available. And we're taking that into account. So the site boundaries will be amended to reflect all that we received through the last consultation on availability. And once that work's completed, we'll be able to present a further update to DPP on that. In terms of the site assessment methodology more generally, as members will be aware, so when we went out to consultation last summer on the issues and options, we included a draft site assessment methodology, and we received a good level of feedback on that, and several improvements are now proposed in response to that to make it a bit clearer and also to respond to a couple of national updates. And that includes that the Department of Transport have developed what's called a connectivity tool, which is a sort of really advanced piece of work that they've done right across the country, which provides a standardized measure of people's ability to travel by walking, cycling and public transport to reach jobs, shops, schools, hospitals and other services. And the draft MPPF is very clear that there'd be an expectation that that should be used to inform the selection of sites in local plans. So we'll need to sort of incorporate that into our site assessment methodology. And there's also been new guidance from the government in terms of how we should be assessing sites and presenting that. And it strongly advises that we should be presenting scores for sites in a sort of RAG, red, amber, green rating rather than a numeric scoring, which was the approach that we took last time. So again, we'll be looking to amend the methodology to reflect that. And more generally, I think we had feedback from sort of members of the public and others that people sometimes found it quite hard to understand what all these different numbers meant. There was lots of different categories. There's lots of things that you need to look at when considering the suitability of a site, but how we brought it together, I think not everyone was always clear on exactly what that means. So we're proposing that we'll group the results of the assessment into 5 categories, which I think should hopefully make it simpler and clearer to understand. So grouping together scores related to the connectivity of the site, which would include how well connected a site is to a railway station. As you may recall from the discussion on the draft MPPF at the last development plan panel, the MPPF suggests that there would be a presumption in favour of sites which are in reasonable walking distance of railway stations. So it's something we specifically need to take into account when we're assessing sites. There'll also be a group of scores relating to flood risk, so looking at all the factors relevant to flood risk. One on land type, use and location, so looking at where does the site sit in relation to the settlement hierarchy. Is it grey belt? Is it green belt? Are there hazards? Is it green space? Is it previously developed land? What agricultural land classification does it have? So lots of things related to the sort of type or the use of the land. There'll be a further 4th category on the environmental value of sites, so looking at things like nature conservation and habitat designations, or heritage, woodland, trees, landscape character and so on. And finally a sort of 5th grouping of infrastructure capacity, so scores in relation to the capacity of infrastructure to support development on that site, so including highways, the sort of site access, water and sewerage, utilities, schools and health services. And the intention is that an overall RAG score, so sort of you get an overall score for those 5 categories, but that would also then be broken down into each individual component. So I think it should sort of help strike the balance between making sure that there's a whole wide range of factors that we need to consider, but present that in a sort of slightly simplified way for people, which hopefully will make it easier to understand what it means and what it's showing. And so over the coming months, the team will be updating the assessment of the sites using this approach, and that will include assessment of new sites that we had submitted to us through the last consultation when there was a call for sites, along with sort of revised boundaries for a number of sites. So we also got through the call for sites proposals to amend the boundaries of sites or to sort of change the uses that sites have been put forward towards. So we'll be updating the assessment of all of the sites in line with that methodology to feed into the next consultation. And as previously proposed, you may recall that the site assessment methodology sort of split what we called gateway tests, which are sort of fundamentals that if you, for example, the site is in the functional floodplain, it doesn't matter if it's great on all of accounts, it's in the functional floodplain, it's not a suitable site for development, so we don't need to consider details of that site. So we'll still have that approach, and the sort of, unless it could be mitigated, sites which are failing those sort of key gateway tests, we wouldn't progress to more detailed assessment purely to make effective use of our resources. And then the final point in the paper is really just for your awareness, because panel will recall that we've had previous discussions about sort of green belt and grey belt assessment. That's going to form part of the evidence base to this plan. And earlier in this year, there was an all-member briefing on that grey belt and green belt assessment. And just wanted to flag that a short position statement on that has now been published on the council's website, which sort of simply explains what the green belt is, what national policy says, and how we're considering the green belt through the Leeds local plan. So that's really just for information that is on the website now. And more generally, as we sort of indicated previously, the intention would be that that green belt assessment will be published as part of the evidence base for the plan content and evidence consultation. So I think then, just in conclusion, there's sort of going to be continued progress throughout this year on the local plan, with 2 key consultations taking place, along with a lot of work to refine our understanding of the availability and suitability of sites, which will feed into the plan content and evidence consultation. As I alluded to at the start, there is a slight change to one of the recommendations. So as it currently stands, as recommendation B asks that DPP endorse the issuing and publication of the notice of intent to commence plan making and to formally start making the plan under the new plan making regulations. Proposing that we just delete that recommendation and that we also make a correction to paragraph 40 of the main report, so that it reads that post executive board, the notice of intent will be published on the website. Because I think, just on reflection, I think it would make more sense to take that notice of intent to commence alongside the scoping consultation through DPP and then to executive board, just to make sure that we're clear that we've got the explicit approval of executive board to begin preparing the plan under the new recommendations, and sort of just avoids any risk, however small, that the previous agreement we've got to prepare the local plan, which was under the old recommendations, couldn't be seen to carry across. It doesn't impact on the timescales for preparing the plan or the sort of sequence set out in the report. It just makes sure effectively we're sort of crossing the I's and dotting the T's, making sure that the plan's fully legally compliant from the start of the process. So that's all from me, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Just before the direct, are we okay with the recommendation of what's to be deleted from the report? And so I'll take that as an answer, yes, so that's fine for that. So yeah, questions, members. Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the introduction. There's quite a lot to unpack, and plan making is complex and complicated at the best of times. Even when you're immersed in it, and for the general public, community groups, parish councils, etc., it's, even those that are well engaged in it, it's complicated, and this is going to be a challenge to explain to people, because it's it's a bit like we kicked off in a football match. Sorry, Councillor Pryor. I know I've lost him already. And the first half went quite well, and we were a goal up, and then we went in at half time and came out, and the rules had changed. Our goal had been chalked off because the VAR rule, offside rule, had been changed retrospectively. The car park had been redesignated as grey belt, and half the pitch has been designated for housing land. And the ball's changed, and you now get 5 points for a goal instead of 1. And we're kind of starting again. So it's going to be tricky to get all of this across to the public.
Not like that.
It can be. It can be. But it's complex and confusing, and we're going to have a big job to explain it to people. On some of the specifics you talked about, the RAG rating, I like the simplicity of it, but the first question we're going to get back is, why is it that colour? And so I actually think you need to do both. I think having the RAG rating is very helpful to people, but you need the explanation, because that's what we're going to get swamped with straight away. Why is that one red? Why is that one green? Why is that one amber? And I think the scoring system you had in the consultation, it wasn't perfect. Whatever you put forward wouldn't be perfect, but you could get a sense to it, and people are used to it now. I think if you add the RAG rating, that will help. Then I'm really keen to hear how you're proposing to explain all of this to the public, and that we're starting again, but we're using what we've already done to help us get to this point. And it's making sure the consultation is still qualitative and meaningful, despite the fact we haven't fed back to people from the last time we asked them, which is going to cause quite a bit of consternation. So you're asking us what we think again, and you haven't yet told us if you were going to take any notice of what we said to you last time, which is a challenge to overcome. And I'm not clear how we're going to do that. On one specific bit, which is again where the confusion comes in, you've got the list here of council-owned sites that have been dismissed from the plan, and I welcome any clarity we can give to people, because they're going to have been sat under the threat of potential development that a lot of us will know it's never going to happen in that site. Of course, it's been put forward, but it's an awfully long time for people to live under that cloud. A specific one in my ward I'd point to, which is in council ownership, which we've been told privately has no prospect of development, which is across the street car park. I'm wondering why it's not on this list. And it makes me nervous, and it will make our residents nervous. It's one where community groups, voluntary groups, the local primary school, businesses, the doctor's surgery over the road are all deeply concerned. It had the third most comments of any site in the city. And when you've eliminated some, but some are left in, that worries people even more. And it's potentially still 6-7 months before anybody's going to hear anything. And that concern has a real life impact on people now. So the more we can sort of knock things out, and so that's gone, the better it is for people. Otherwise, it's an awfully long time to have to live under this cloud of potential development. So there's various other things. Broadly, I understand and get what we're doing and support it. I think the big thing is how on earth we communicate this. It makes sense when we've got an hour or so to talk about it here in detailed papers, but when you've got to get it across to the public very simply and quickly, it's a very complicated message to sell, and we need some serious thought about how we're going to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think you're entirely right, and I think we're very mindful of how we communicate. That's going to be really important, and I think we want to try and keep it as simple as possible. And I think it is going to take some drafting and redrafting to get that messaging right. I think it's something we can start early on. You know, we need to make sure we sort of refine and get that wording right, and possibly sort of testing it against non-planners as well. I think sometimes we're kind of in a bit of a site, you know, as planners it makes sense. So, but I think testing that with people. But yeah, I think it is going to be really important to get that messaging right, and kind of what the process is and what this scoping consultation is, what's coming next, and what's happening at different points in time, and setting out that timetable for people as well, so they kind of know, okay, well, maybe I've got a comment on the scope, I want to make it now, but I've got a comment on site, but that will come later. So I think I think it is a challenge, and we're going to have to sort of rise to that and make it as clear as possible. I think, yes, welcome support in terms of the sort of RAG rated approach. And I think that's something that we also found. We had a sort of methodology which set out what the scoring was, but they didn't necessarily redecide. We had some internal notes on that, and I think maybe sort of reflecting on that, how we can sort of set that out alongside the score. So, for example, this site, overlaps with a flood zone, so it, 90% of the site is in the flood zone, so that's why it scores this. I think we can reflect on how we present that for next time. And yeah, in terms of the list of sites, so clearly this is just a list of sites that we've had identified as no longer being available. It's not an assessment in any way of their suitability, which is a separate assessment. And these are the ones that we've had confirmed to us by our sort of asset management team that they would like to withdraw from the process at this stage. I don't think it precludes any sort of other changes coming forward in future, but certainly at this current point in time, it's these 15 sites which we've been advised to remove from the process.
A brief follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the specific site, that's what worries me. It's a site that wasn't put forward by the council, as I understand it, that is in council ownership. And so it's going to cause even more angst in the community than there already is, that it's still there, when we've proactively said, no, we don't want that, we don't want that, we don't want that, we don't want that. We'll leave that one there for now. That suggests somebody's thinking about something. We don't know anything about it, and it bothers me greatly. So I would really like someone to go away and get back to us and in a form that we can share publicly with our residents ASAP, to either be really straight and honest that this site is out of the mix, or if somebody's got a plan for something that we don't know about, then we should know about it and our community should know about it.
Councillor Carlisle, and then Councillor Anderson and Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you. Some of it's on the same themes, actually. I was going to say, to help Jonathan, it's a bit like Eurovision, where you should have used that analogy, I think, where you've obviously got the jury vote first, Jonathan. I know you know this detailed. And then obviously it goes to the public vote, which is a completely different criteria people are assessing, hence it changes greatly at that. And it was nice to hear you, Alan, speaking about that threat over people, because you could have a word with some of your group members who've been saying forever that the council is coming for their green belt, which I don't think is what we all think is what this plan says, given that the assessment shows that most of the sites that are in green belt are being would be assessed as being not suitable for development on it. So I think some of your absolutely, I think this was before any of that anyway. So some members of your group have been telling everyone that the council is intent on building on the green belt next to their house, which we all know isn't the case of what's happening, and we all know at the assessment those sites will be removed. I'm sure they will all be saying that they have saved those sites for their communities when they were never going to be developed on in the first place. Obviously there is the thing about greenbelt assessment and review of the greenbelt. That's a separate issue, isn't it, than the council are coming for your greenbelt, which isn't necessarily what has happened. Some private developers have submitted a site that may completely not be suitable. So, but it was nice to hear that you're concerned about that threat. But it'd be nice if some members were
exacerbating that threat. The cross-party thing.
I'm really concerned about just that scoping consultation again, because we've been told a lot of things, and the concerns I've got are, one, that we're going to have to let people know, as exactly as you said, Alan, on that. Why haven't we acted on what they've told us already? How can we express that very clearly to them? But also that fatigue with the consultation. All of us probably know, for instance, if we take a planning application as one, if somebody comes back with the same planning application 3 times, by the time you get to the 3rd one, you get a lot fewer comments on it because somebody's commented twice saying that they don't think it's suitable. To be honest, I think some developers put it in the 3rd time to know that they'll get fewer comments on it and it might just pass. Luckily, planning officers normally remember those comments from previous times. But I'm really concerned we'll end up with next to no comments on what we've got, and it won't help scope. So how can we use, can you just be a bit clear around how we're using the details that people have already provided us, how can we use that as the basis for where we're going? And then I guess my second concern was around the grouping of the scores in the same way. I think there's nuances in there. And if we're in any way grouping those scores, how do we work out whether, you know, a site may be unsuitable because one of those bottom row categories comes out as red. But if you average and group them together, that might come out as an amber rating or a green rating, even though one is red. One red may mean it's unsuitable to be developed on, regardless of, you know, it might be absolutely perfect in every regard, but there's no connectivity whatsoever. And I'm just really concerned about how we tie all that together, which I think the numbers really attempted to do, and they were a really good way of working through those sites and those complications, because something could get -3 for one thing, but another thing could only get -1 for. So it already was sort of at the back of the queue. If it's red, amber, green, I'm really concerned that when you add that all up, you lose all the nuance in that sense.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of how we feed back on what people have already fed into us through the consultation will absolutely sort of help shape the plan. And I think the critical point that we need to communicate through this is that yes, we need to do a scoping consultation. The regulations require that we do that, but I don't think that just needs to be on what I think it's almost a sort of restating, well, what is the plan covering? But I think we need to be really clear with people that they don't need to, I guess that consultation fatigue point, you don't need to respond to this consultation if you don't want to. If you've got comments about the scope, by all means, we'd welcome those. We'd like to hear that feedback. But if they don't, you've got comments about particular sites or the particular approaches to certain policies, you can sit back a bit, or you can prepare, you know, we were doing a further consultation later on in the year. So, you know, that is coming. We will be providing that sort of feedback, that update, to taking into account what we've received previously. That's all kind of in the mix and will be informing that plan content and evidence consultation. That effectively is the update to what we did last summer, but we need to do this scoping consultation in accordance with the regulations. So I think it's about being clear what that consultation is about and what it is there to, you know, I guess what is the scope of the scoping consultation. It is quite focused. It's not on everything. People don't need to resubmit the comments they've had before. We've got those, we're taking those into account. But if people do have comments, I guess, on the principle of what the plan is covering, you know, then by all means that there's an opportunity to comment on that through an earlier scoping consultation, but the rest will come later in the year. On the sort of grouping of scores point, I think you're right, and I think it wouldn't be that you would just get 5 scores for us. You know, suddenly you go from having 20 or 30 odd categories of scores. You would have an overall, you know, you would still see the scores against individual elements. And I think that you're right, that there'll be instances where there's almost one kicker on a site. There may be one factor, it's only one of the factors, but that means that site is, you know, for example, if the site is designated protected as green space, it's a park, you know, Roundhay Park, for example, you know, that is going to be, it might just score negatively on one factor, but that could be the kicker for the site as a whole. So I think we'll need to reflect that in that kind of overall. If there's a score for that overall grouping, we'd need to reflect that in that there's a sort of significant negative there, which means overall, whilst there may be some positives on neutrals, there's a negative against that. So I think that all of those detailed factors will still be considered. We'll still have a score against those. But I take your point about how we make sure in presenting that it kind of doesn't kind of smooth it all off and make everything look the same when there are sort of differences there.
Thank you, Judge. Just on the point about being clear with local people about what they've said, the intent is to feed that back via a report of consultation. So that will come around the November consultation. We wouldn't want to do a large report of consultation, which then again listed all of the sites and what people thought about them, because then that's an opportunity for those that disagree to have another go at that. But certainly for that November consultation, there will be a report back on what those people have said to us, and that can be classed as evidence to inform that November consultation.
And a point of, a lot of them are the same, but just points of clarity. One question I've been asked already. You've taken out some council sites already. Does that mean if you've not taken the council site out, then that is likely to go ahead to the next stage at least? And that one. And then secondly, another question I've received, particularly from one part of my area, have the landowners that have said now clearly that they do not want their land included, why can that not be taken out now? And because what I'm getting at is, without accusing any landowners in particular, some people have said, oh, I don't want the site taken forward. But then when they've been pressed, they're reluctant to put it into writing to confirm to you. So in other words, they're saying something to keep the residents happy locally. And then, but privately, because one of them said to me, oh, if the council decide to do it, then I'll have to accept that. You know, so now I blame you. You're the ones that are going to be bringing it forward. So that's on that one. The next one, by the time you're going to be doing this, WICA will hopefully have completed its outline business case on the mass transit, which will then have the transport corridor in it. Are you going to reflect that? Because obviously it makes sense to put development along the corridor or corridors, depending on what it is, to make it clear. I mean, for example, we just recently exec board and approved work down in Ellen Road, the regeneration plan around there, which makes sense in terms of the other things. So that then lets people see where the development could take place, and people can understand that. Then the final point is, are you going to be able to give any rough range of indicator as to the targets people might have? Because if people know that they're needing to find 500 houses locally, they know they're going to have to choose the least worst in their eyes. And they might be able to say, well, it would be better if we went for this site. If we're going to have one in this area, this is the one that's least objectionable to, you see what I mean? Least worst, call it whatever you like, to try and get it in. Because otherwise, what's certainly happening in the outer northwest is everybody's playing each other off against everybody else. Bramhope are saying, well, why can't Otley take it? Or Poole take it? Or Cookeries take it? Or Adel take it? You know, in other words, if we can save our site, pass the buck on to some other community for it, which doesn't do anything for building houses where they're actually needed. So if you were clear on that, and that would also get round the comment that Councillor Carlisle made about Greenbelt. So if you're making it clear that the chances are you don't need to build on the Greenbelt in the area, that then takes the pressure off the Greenbelt sites in that particular location. If you've got capacity, say, for 1,000 brownfield houses, and the target is, say, 1,500 for that particular community, then it does take a genius to work out that 500 would have to come from Greenbelt, but then not as many as maybe where there's 2,000 set aside for Greenbelts at the moment. You can manage the situation better, because you're not going to win. You'll never win in this argument. With the community, you'll always upset them, but if you can do anything to minimise the impact on them and show that you're thinking it through and logically trying to put out information that they can make informed decisions on, you know, I just think it's a way of getting it done, because it's not going to be good for anybody what you're doing. But I broadly welcome what you've planned here. It's as if you have reflected back, you are willing to change something. So let's be positive about that. But I still think there are one or two people out there who are going to be looking through every dot and comma, and that could lead to problems for you.
Thank you. So if we just take those sort of questions in terms, so yeah, as I said, this list is the sort of sites that have been confirmed as being withdrawn by the council at this stage in the process. I don't think it precludes sort of further sites. I think perhaps other sites may still be under consideration, and it's certainly not an assessment of their suitability. It's just these are the ones that they do not want us to consider any further at this point in time. I think on other non-council sites is obviously it's easier, you know, because we are the council, it's easier for us to, we've got one, you know, we're speaking to one landowner, we can understand, we can bring together the information about council sites more quickly. We are sort of going through the work to look at non-council owned sites, so sites where the landowner has said they don't want their site to be included and has withdrawn them, or where their boundaries are proposed to be changed, or parts of sites belong to a separate landowner who doesn't want that to be included. So these are all sort of comments that we received through the consultation that we've sort of been analysing, and we're sort of making those changes to those sites at the moment. But to do that across the whole district, it just takes time, so we don't have, and I think it would make more sense to do that. I think what we'd like to do is take that back to you once we've got a sort of comprehensive update on all of the non-council sites. So we are actively working through that at the moment, but we just don't have that done as yet. In terms of mass transit, yes, that is something that we will be looking to reflect through the plan. I think you may recall that in the issues and options, we sort of talked about opportunity areas around the sort of phase 1 mass transit corridors. Clearly, with the sort of timescales for bringing forward mass transit have sort of changed slightly, particularly in terms of refining those corridors down to selecting preferred route options. But certainly it's something I think we need to make sure that the plan looks ahead to what mass transit could do in the future and what it might change. But I think what we don't want to do is, I guess, put all our eggs in one basket, and kind of, we certainly don't want to be releasing any sites that would only be suitable if that mass transit link was in place, because if that doesn't happen, you know, we're stuck with a site that isn't in an optimal location. So I think it is certainly something we'll be sort of considering through the plan and strategy of the plan, and where development's best to go, knowing that is potentially on the horizon. And yeah, on the final point, I think in terms of sort of targets for settlements and people understanding how much development might happen to how many sites, yeah, I think absolutely that's something that we want to be clearer on through the next consultation. I think obviously last time we did have sort of target figure, or sort of not targets, but figures related housing needs down to settlement. And I think what we'd like to be able to do is, yeah, set that out. So you've got, there might be, I don't know, 10 sites around a settlement, but actually we're looking for 100 houses here. There's a combined capacity of, I don't know, 1,000. We only need one of these sites, or we might need two. So sort of setting that in context so people can see both, yeah, how much development's likely to happen, and then I think it helps to inform your decisions about what are the best sites for that. Because if you're looking for 50 homes, it's quite different to if you're looking for, you maybe need one site. If you're looking for more, you need 3 or 4. So I think, yeah, we want to make that, sort of bring that out more in the next consultation to allow people to make sort of meaningfully choices and decisions, and understand, I guess, that ultimately we do need to plan for new housing, but we've got to make decisions about where that best goes. And I think that's an easier decision to make if you understand, well, how much we're looking for. So yeah, absolutely, it's something we want to,
particularly if there is a neighbourhood plan in existence, because the neighbourhood plan is meant to identify not where sites aren't going to be built, it's meant to help identify where sites should be getting built. And that would give the neighbourhood plan groups something they know where the pain could come from. And you might get more constructive feedback saying, yes, we will reluctantly accept site A, but on the understanding that you do not bring forward site C under any circumstances whatsoever. It's a way of getting it done.
We were very active in the first consultation process. Indeed, I think we were the second highest after Barry's area in terms of representations. Places like Gilson Village offering 800 representations on the proposals that were suggested in and around those areas. And we had several passionate public meetings where residents figured out how to play the game. So they learned the rules and figured out how you did it, and look at those subsections and all the rest of it. And changing the rules at this time will breed more suspicion than already exists, because people think that it's a dodgy process anyway. And at the point where the second lot of consultation is going through what appears to be a different process to the first set of consultations, I think that people have even less faith in the process. So I think you might want to make sure that there is the maintaining of how you assess these particular sites. Certainly, I was at a public meeting on this very issue, not last Monday, the Monday before, where we were talking to our community about the least worst option. I mean, their options are nothing. We have pointed out that that's unrealistic. So the next time that we do go out to consultation, I think it needs to be clear that where the numbers are, because you gave us 3 lots of numbers, and the communities being what communities are, they look at the highest number, the worst number as far as they're concerned, and they start to panic. So we need to be clear about your community is going to have to accept X number and make it absolutely clear, not, make a choice out of 3 figures that are in front of you. And you also need to be clear that there are some sites that are not going ahead in any shape, way, or form. So it's absolutely clear. So at the end of the day, when it comes out in November or whenever it actually comes out, it is, as other colleagues have suggested, you need X number of houses, and these are probably 2 or 3 of the sites that you're going to be stuck with, which is, I'll be saying, this is the least worst option. Certainly on the first consultation process, there was a lot of local knowledge that came in that I would hope would help assist in taking out several sites, because people were aware of particular issues with sites that you were certainly not aware of. So I think that might be something that needs to be seriously reflected in next outcome. And the other one's a bit of a question about para 22 on page 21. Can you explain what the last sentence in the first para means? Fundamentally, the identification of grey belt land, blah, 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 blah. What's that actually mean? Because I don't understand what it actually means. So if you could clarify what it means, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of the sort of question or comment in relation to the site assessment methodology, and I guess not wanting to cause mistrust or suspicion that I guess there was somehow sort of trying to fudge or we're changing the approach, so we're getting a different answer. I think it clearly the assessment methodology was draft when we went out last time. So, but I think there's not really a fundamental change to the factors that we're looking at are still the same. I think it's trying to present that in a way which is easier for people to understand. So I think we can, and I think it's how we present that and how we explain that. And I think we will need to explain, I guess, what the changes are so people can read across from one to the other. So this is a sort of a refinement of what we've done before, which tries to make it clearer and easier for people to understand. So, I think it's great that people, some people have spent a lot of time and effort sort of delving in, making sure that they understand it, but perhaps that shouldn't be the expectation. That people need to, I think if we can make it easier for more people to understand, there's a benefit to that. But yeah, I think we'll need to set out where the approach has changed, and so you can sort of read across from one to the other, because yeah, we don't want it's not being done to unsettle the process. It's trying to help and trying to make it clearer going forward. Yes, I agree with the point about being clear about how much development needs. We're sort of proposing in an area what the development needs are, and that being helped to inform people's choices about what they may see as the least worst option, as you put it. I think, yeah, fully agree that is a point that we need to look at. And I think what sort of proposed in the paper is that we would sort of grade sites a bit like we did before, but be really clear these are clearly preferred sites. They're looking like they're highly likely to be allocated. The sort of marginally preferred ones and marginal emissions, so kind of where sitting on the cusp you could potentially take a different view, but they're sort of, we think these ones are the better to meet the needs. We think these ones just fall below that, but keen for people's views on that. And then sort of clear emission sites, the sites that fall short of the mark, they're not needed to meet the requirements, we wouldn't be expecting to allocate them. So again, a kind of evolution from what we presented last time, but providing a bit more clarity on the sort of sites and how they're scoring and how that relates to needs, and the RAG rating reflecting that. And in terms of the final point then on Greenbelt, I think the point sort of trying to make here is that whether land is green belt or if it's grey belt only really matters when, in terms of if there's a proposal for development on it. Just because something's grey belt, if it's not needed for development, it doesn't change its status as green belt. It is still green belt land. So I think we need to, what we want to do is we'll publish the green belt assessment alongside the plan, so you can read the two together. Because just because a sort of an area of land, for example, doesn't perform or sort of doesn't score strongly in terms of the purposes of the green belt, which is what that assessment's looking at, doesn't necessarily mean that it's suitable for development, or it's the right location for development, or it's somewhere that we'd be looking to allocate for development. So I think the point we're sort of trying to make here is that the two need to be read together, and green belt is still green belt until it is either allocated to a development. So I don't know if that clarifies the point, but I think certainly that's what we're trying to set out there.
Thank you. Just to say, I share the real concerns that Councillor Lamb has about the particular site, and I just want to reiterate this because of all the sites that came forward for the whole of Wetherby Ward, the Crosley Street site, car park site, by far it caused the most anxiety across the ward, and the fact that it's not on this list is just, I think it would be a mistake to publish this without really considering sites like that are highly controversial, not to include it. So I would just say we need to really carefully consider whether that is included or not. And if it isn't included, because exactly the point that Councillor Lamb has said, that if it isn't included, people will think it's definitely being considered. So I would say if it is being considered, please let us know. If it isn't, it needs to be on the list, because that's going to cause a lot of anxiety. I completely agree as well that I know we've said this several times, but the point that it would be really helpful to identify roughly the number of dwellings that we're looking to build in a particular parish. For us, it's about parishes, because we're an area where it's all divided up into parish and town councils. The way that each parish council approached it was very different, and there were some, like the one that I'm on in Boston Spa, where we looked at it very carefully and looked at ranking the sites. There were others that we visited and didn't have probably as much input into, where they've just said, we don't want any development. We're not even going to consider it almost. We don't want any development. So I think by saying, okay, this is the number we're looking for, it will encourage them to actually go to look at it in detail and say, okay, if we have to have one, then this would be their preferred option. I think that's really useful. The other thing I wanted to ask really was that we've got a motorway running through our ward, and there's always a lot of concern around how the proximity of developments to the motorway in terms of noise and air pollution. So it would be good to understand, is that something that, what weight is given to that when looking at sites? Because we've got a site very, very close to the motorway on the edge of Wetherby, which I'm sure must be very difficult to live in some of those houses in terms of noise and air pollution. So it's the wider scheme of things, how much weight is given to that when we're looking at suitability of sites, and actually also considering that, given that Leeds Bradford Airport have applied for more night flights, if those were to be allowed, is that something, and clearly there's a lot of concern around that in terms of noise pollution and air pollution. Is that again something that is considered when we're looking at sites?
Thank you. I will come back to you both, Councillor Stables and Councillor Lamb, on the Crossley Street, because this is a strategic panel, so it's probably not, we don't want to spend a lot of time going into detail, but just to illustrate the process, we're talking about a brownfield site, And we're talking about one of the few brownfield sites that Wetherby as a main settlement actually has and has been identified through this process, because I think we were really keen to identify the brownfield sites, to scrutinise them and assess them through the process before any non-brownfield sites were released. So people had the comfort that we'd looked to brownfield first. Now, the fact that this is as a council site that isn't on this list indicates to me that we are going through that suitability test and we're taking account of the comments that people made on Crossley Street through the previous consultation. And I know there were lots of concerns about access, about congestion. Those will be taken into account as part of the process moving forward. So I don't know the position and the intent with regards to this site, but as a brownfield site, one of the few brownfield sites within a main settlement, I think it's wise to see it through the process and see it through the site assessment. Thank you.
Yeah, it was just to say that it actually wasn't mostly about the accessibility or site. It was actually because it's a car park, and much needed car park in the town was the main reason.
Yeah, just coming back to that, I know you don't want to focus quite rightly on that, but it is in the public domain now. It's not about when we publish it, it's now published, that table. So we really could do with a response ASAP. So the two quick things I wanted to say, one, could you point us or send round the green belt, grey belt statement? Because I've just searched for it on the council website and it's probably me being dumb, but I can't immediately find it. When typing green belt, grey belt position statements, nothing comes up. Seemed a sensible thing to put in. And the second point was just around what work we've done on the legal soundness of this approach, from some previous bitter experience of local plans in Leeds. We wouldn't want it to unravel down the line, and we're not exactly following the guy. It's a pragmatic and sensible approach that I think most people would support. But have we really tested, is there any risk, given we're relying on consultation that took place before we undertook the scoping of the plan? Does it give us, and I think it'd be remiss of us not to ask that question, and certainly you might not be able to give us full detail on what advice we've had now. I'll certainly be wanting that at executive board when it goes, to be crystal clear that we've got solid legal advice that this is sound and we're not going to unravel and then have to come back to the beginning again.
Yes, I mean it's a key question, Councillor Lamb, and as you'd expect, we've considered that in great detail, and actually the detailed regulations have only just very recently been published, which is part of the reason why the change to the recommendations on this report is that to de-risk the plan moving forward, we get a fresh executive board endorsement under the new regulations. The key thing here will be, under the new regulations and under the new system, we will go through each and every step of that process as laid out by government and as laid out by law. That means that at each point in time, new representors can come forward and tell us what they think about either sites that are in the plan or other sites that they may wish to be in the plan. But all of that work and all of those conversations that we had with local people last summer, we're keen for that to be reflected, and we're going to reflect that as evidence base that's helped inform our starting point under the new system, to give people the understanding that we've taken on board what they've said, we've reflected it back both through our approach to site assessment and how we've scored sites, so that they don't have to then make those same points to us again. So I don't think that is a legal or a soundness misstep. I think that, as you said, I think that's a pragmatic way forward, but we do have to be open to the fact that there may be others out there that didn't engage with the process last summer that may now wish to, and they can do so under the new process.
Yeah, I totally accept that, and it makes sense. The concerns around things like, will people be able to challenge that there wasn't an opportunity for a call for sites? Obviously, we're relying on a previous call for sites. Does there have to be an opportunity for people to submit new sites within this, and are the periods that you've described sufficient within the regulations? Because we're trying to streamline everything. It makes perfect sense from where we are, but that doesn't necessarily make it legally sound. And that's I'd just like to see written down the advice that we've had that says, no, we're confident and satisfied that there is no challenge to come that would be successful. There'll be challenges to come, I'm certain, but whether they're successful or not is a different matter.
Yeah, we'll certainly, when we start to bring this through to DPP and executive board under the new system, we'll absolutely make sure that that legal advice is very clear.
I'll just turn the microphone on. Yeah, so there's nothing else for us to additionally clarify from officers' perspective, so we're happy with that, and you've got the notes from the debate. Yeah. Yep. Perfect, then we'll move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item number 8, Lead Local Authority Monitoring Report 24/25.
Thank you, Chair. So the Authority Monitoring Report is a document we have a statutory duty to produce each year. It reports on the implementation of the local development scheme. This essentially means that the AMR sets out and assesses performance of the policies contained within our local plan to ensure they're working as intended. An executive summary has been shared within Appendix 1. This starts on page 33. This document summarises the main report and contains a short paragraph setting out general performance for all of the monitoring indicators and subtopics. The main AMR document, that's located in Appendix 2 of your packs, starting on page 47. This full report includes all the necessary and relevant commentary, data tables, and grassroots subtopic. So to run through this with you, this year's 2024-2025 AMR covers the period starting the 1st of April 2024 and ends on the 31st of March 2025. The necessary time in having this report prepared over the past year reflects data being updated and published at different times. Some of these data sources we rely on come about 9 months or so after the AMR monitoring period ends, so there's inevitable lag with that. And then it takes some time following that for us, obviously, to analyse and collate this data together to present within the report. In terms of content, so what we have to cover includes monitoring indicators, which are set out in the local plan. We have to report on that within the AMR, but we took the recent decision to broaden the scope of the AMR to cover other topics which directly and indirectly influence the plan, to provide more comprehensive and meaningful information. So, for example, some topics on climate change and population wouldn't have been covered otherwise. The aim of this is to provide a starting point for people to look at when wanting to access relevant data to our plans and policies. The AMR is therefore structured around key 11 topics with subsequent subtopics. All of these are set out within pages 48 and 49 of your packs. The data we present, that's typically presented within its current context for the latest 2024-2025 period. But comparisons are also made against last year as well as against longer term data to establish trends and patterns. There's comparisons to other regions to see how Leeds is performing compared to elsewhere, wherever that's possible. An indicative red, amber and green scoring for each subtopic is also provided where appropriate. This scoring looks at general performance on the subtopic against any stated target or expectation for both the short and long term, with a short explanation explaining the scoring given at the end of that subtopic. So the report has been shared, and this details the headline messages from the latest AMR, but to run through some of these, for housing, 4,311 homes were completed in 2024-2025. This was the second highest year for delivery on record and exceeded planned targets for this year by 709 homes. The majority of this delivery was on brownfield land, primarily within the city centre and main urban area. Within this delivery, 584 affordable homes were built. This was down 12% from last year, but remains relatively high compared to previous years, representing the fourth highest year of affordable delivery since 2020. 2012. Development for employment uses remained relatively low against planned targets and past delivery. However, delivery for these uses vary year on year, as these tend to be made up of large but relatively few schemes. So when looking back at expected delivery since 2012, 75% of office floor space was delivered, and 66% of industrial land has been completed against planned targets. New data on levels of relative deprivation in Leeds was released for this year. This shows a relative reduction in the number of neighbourhoods in the most deprived category, so a general improvement in deprivation. This improved from 24% of our neighbourhoods being classified as the most deprived in 2019 to 17% in 2025. Leeds also tends to compare favourably to most other core cities in terms of relative deprivation. Monitoring of carbon dioxide emissions from the government shows continued reductions in Leeds, with a 3% reduction in total emissions from last year and a 44% reduction from the 2005 baseline. The majority of emissions continue to come from transport, which has seen the least overall reduction in emissions. The level of carbon reduction in Leeds tends to compare slightly favourably to reductions seen across Yorkshire and the UK, showing a good sign of progress there. Renewable energy installations and capacity across Leeds all increased, with energy generation remaining similar to last year. This trend continues to exceed planned targets. Air quality also continues to significantly improve, with all but one air quality management area, which is in Poole in Wharfdale. They've been revoked due to continued compliance, so we only monitor one instead of 6 now. All remaining monitoring sites for nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter met air quality objectives for a second consecutive year. 30% of journeys to work which were monitored in 2024 were made through sustainable modes, up from 32% last year. This includes walking, cycling, bus and rail journeys. Footfall in the city centre increased for another year by 4%, with 12.8 million people recorded along Briggate, reaching close to pre-COVID levels. November the 30th in 2024 saw the busiest day of the year for 5 years, with 76,000 people recorded on that day alone. Housing delivery also remains high in the city centre, with 1,763 homes delivered. As for heritage in Leeds, 2 new Grade 2 buildings were listed in 2024-2025, with no recorded demolitions. 2 listed buildings were delisted from Historic England's Heritage at Risk register, with only 8 buildings now remaining on this list. A new unified and expanded Morley conservation area was also adopted. Lastly, income from planning applications continues to increase from the previous year. 10.56 million was received from the community infrastructure levy. This was up 7%, with 2.7 million of this spent on strategic infrastructure and 1.4 million on this spent on local infrastructure. Income from Section 106 agreements nearly doubled to 17.3 million, with 8.7 million pounds spent. So we welcome members' thoughts and comments on the AMR document and its contents prior to being approved by the Chief Planning Officer and wider publication on the Council's website. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I can definitely tell there's lots of development in the city centre because I have to keep buying more leaflets. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, can I just ask a couple of questions, Chair? And a comment. I'll make a comment on the first bullet point, which shows we're doing our bit, I think, for providing housing. And I would hope that the message gets through to ministers that I'm looking at Jonathan here, who might be sending another letter, gets through to ministers that actually it's not local authorities that are holding up development, it's developers themselves. Just a couple of points. We mentioned affordables, and we've got 584 on there, which is a plus, can't complain. But how many should we have provided? And it's difficult to work out because we've got different target levels across the city. So if anybody's got that figure, I'll be interested. I think everything else is generally positive, but I would ask the question in relation to the last bullet point, where it appears we've got 4.7 million in Section 106 money for environmental works, of which we're only managing to spend 1.7. So where is the money and why aren't we spending it? If you know the answer to the second part of that question.
Do you want me to come back on the affordable housing, or do you want to? Yeah. All right. Sorry. The core strategy doesn't actually set a target for the number of affordable homes to be delivered. It only sets a target for the number of homes overall. But the core strategy sets a need for 1,200 affordable homes. So we're significantly short of the need. In the Leeds local plan, that need has risen to about 1,500 homes. So there'll be new policies and new approaches to see if we can actually close that gap. But not all of the delivery of that affordable housing need comes through the planning system and Section 106 houses. It comes through a variety of other ways, including through government funding for housing revenue account funded homes, for example, and that comes from Homes England. So in answer to your question, there is no target for affordable housing. There's only a need.
And then just to answer your second question, so we obviously receive money, but we spend it at a different time. So we retain some money and then it's spent in accordance with the infrastructure funding statement. So that sets out how we are spending it in much more detail and when we retain it and when we spend it. So it's not just we get the money now and we spend it now. We get it, retain it and spend it in accordance to further programmes.
Follow up?
I appreciate there may not be a target, but there's a need, but we certainly don't appear to be meeting the need. And I should be interested to see what policies we can put in place and enforce that will actually get us somewhere near. I'm still not sure about the 106 money, because it's 4.7 this year. So I suppose the question is how much money is actually sitting in the 106 environmental works pot, which presumably
yeah, I don't know that figure. I don't know that figure's hand, but it will be available in the infrastructure funding statement, which is on our website. I don't have that to hand. It's not something that I'm available to, but it is available on there.
I might say, because I'm having some experience with Section 106. For example, I've got £60,000 of effective stranded Section 106 agreements in my ward for trees that were designed purely for the city centre. So I think sometimes some of the issues, because this is what we're working through at the moment, is actually the monies are there to be spent, but actually what they were originally agreed to be spent on, they can't actually be spent on. And so there's issues of having to try and release them. I believe there's a bit of work looking at Section 106 going on at the moment to try and see how we can deal with that. So I think that's part of the problem. Sometimes you've got historic figures as well that are just stuck because you can't do them. But that's the experience we're having, because I'm trying to unlock £60,000 in my ward at the moment. That's basically stuck. Councillor Lamb? Yeah, of course, yeah.
Just very briefly, I completely agree with your point about where some of the hold-up is. It's exactly the conversation I have with ministers and other people we have from the government here. I do think that's the case for Leeds. I don't think that's the case for all local authorities across the country. And actually, some of my frustration sometimes is the government is addressing kind of where the blockage is local authorities and don't always address where the blockage is developers as well. And the point I've tried to make is it's quite different in Leeds and we've got a different set of circumstances.
Thank you, Chair. I can answer the last question. There's about 50 to 60 million of unspent Section 106 balances in Leeds, including for things like Supertram, which have been rattling around for a long time. And whether we get the chance to spend them on a tram or not is a different matter, but that's for another day. I thought perhaps it would be helpful to stick with our RAG rating approach on this. So house building in Leeds, green, excellent. And why does that matter? Because it keeps the council in control with a plan-led approach. Of course, that's of no comfort to places like where Colin represents in Otley or Penny and I represent in Wetherby, where North Yorkshire have had their housing target trebled overnight with no time to prepare a new plan. And we are facing a lot of speculative development right now. So I hope we can get some reassurance today that this council will keep strongly getting involved in those applications on our border with people trying to expand our settlements when the housing need has already been robustly assessed and is being met. What our chances are, I don't know, but I think we have to be seen for our residents to try the absolute best we can to get involved in those applications, and I hope that we will. As Councillor Campbell alluded to, affordable housing delivery is a problem. And again, that's an issue for our residents, because it's one thing, and it's where a lot of the concerns and frustrations in our area is coming from, that lots of land is being, and in some cases valuable land is being lost to development, but not for houses that local people can afford to live in. And so we really do, through these current processes, need to come up with a way to deal with it. And it is so frustrating for every member that sits on plans panels, the number of times that we're dealing with viability issues and developers say, oh, no, we can't do that. We can't do your affordables and your BNG and this, and as has been pointed out, the issues are not the planning process. There's enough planning consents to meet the housing need in the country quite comfortably. It's the fact that those houses are not being delivered, and we've got to find a way through that. Not all of that is down to planning. Some of it is down to access to credit. Some of it is down to building materials and costs and supplies and access to labour and things like that. One of the concerns I really have, where we'd go into the red category on this, is around employment land, and the situation is getting worse. And that ties very strongly into the green belt, grey belt. So I just read the statement. Thank you for sending the link through. The challenge, the position we're in, is fine when it comes to housing, to a degree. As things unwind and the things around train stations, that's a different matter. So there is, Councillor Carlisle, quite a big threat to green belt in areas like yours and mine, with the new government policies. Where I'm really concerned is around employment land, where we are not meeting the needs that we've identified. And we've seen in this room the examples of sites which will be classified as grey belt. And yes, they may not pass the test for housing right now, but if it's an employment site, if it's a battery energy storage, solar farm, big distribution warehouse, data storage, all that kind of thing, I think we're very vulnerable on those sites at the moment because we are not meeting the need. So, and it's got worse in the last year. So what is the plan to deal with that? Do we need to be thinking about some release of land so that we don't, am I right? We are quite vulnerable to speculative applications on those things right now. And what's the plan to address it so we don't wait until we're trying to defend ourselves at an appeal?
Just to address your first point, to confirm that we've written to Councillor Les of North Yorkshire to raise those issues, particularly affecting Wetherby and Otley. So I don't have a huge update at this point, but we are in contact.
Thanks, Councillor. Just 2 points. You reiterated the concern that Councillor Campbell made about affordable housing. The other thing that I didn't say, but I will say now, is that the Executive Board endorsed the local affordable housing strategy recently, and that looked not just at what the plan can achieve in terms of delivery of affordable housing, but what a better improved partnership approach can achieve as well for the city, working closely with the combined authority, with Homes England and with registered providers. So the City Council's put an awful lot of effort into thinking more widely around that issue, and the plan, and the local plan is looking at that specifically, to how we can use the planning levers to get more affordable housing. You're correct. I think we've said at this forum before that we're okay in terms of a 5-year supply, in terms of how national guidance is framed around release of grey belt, green belt land, but we are vulnerable because we don't have a current supply of employment land, and for things like battery energy storage, and renewable energy schemes, which aren't employment schemes, but for things like battery energy storage, which is seen as nationally significant infrastructure. We do need to get a strategy in place. That's what the Leeds local plan will do. And as that progresses through its various stages, there'll be a lot more clarity in terms not only of the sites that are being considered to be marginally preferable, but also a suite of policies that can support that. But in the meantime, we have decision taking in the development management system for assessing any speculative planning applications that do come forward, and obviously the need for those issues will be a material consideration. But that isn't to say that all of those other environmental, landscape, air quality, and security and safety issues that one would normally take into account in a planning application would be set aside. So we are in a point where we would be vulnerable, as you say, but we've got other policies in the plan that can help us where we do get speculative proposals coming forward to make sure that we're choosing the right sites. Thank you.
Any follow-up?
Thank you. I mean, Colin asked my question, but I don't think he got the answer that he was hoping for. I was going to ask around affordable housing. If you look in the report at the back, actually, Colin, what you'll note is it says only 194 of those 584 came from Section 106. The rest were delivered either from grants or by the council directly. So actually, there's only 194. And Colin and I, sitting on City Plans panel with many other colleagues around this table, see many times when we get comments around viability that may lead to why we don't necessarily get the affordable housing we think we deserve from some of the applications. So I think what Colin's comment was, if you went across all the applications that we've had in and you totted up the affordable housing provision they should have got, 7% or otherwise, what would that number have been? So I wonder whether that's something we can comment on. I'm sure it would have been higher than 194. I guess to ask another question that Colin would have probably asked on City Plans is the ones Colin describes as buying out of their commitment, i.e. giving a commuted sum in instead, are those included in that 194? But I'm asking the question, but I'm sure more than 194 should have been provided had every developer met the Section 106 that we would expect them to meet on that. However, I'm imagining that viability came up as the concern in it, but it would be nice for us to know, has viability been the difference in us not achieving the amount of affordable housing we need across the city?
I don't think it's coincidental that we're seeing that low figure in terms of Section 106 contributions to affordable housing in the year 2024-25, because that was the year that there was significant sort of turmoil in world markets, and various global factors came together to create a very difficult and challenging development market, not just post-COVID, but various other macroeconomic shocks as well. And those shocks and the situation with the market, I think were brought to plans panel, joint plans panel meeting, I think last year, where I think members had advice from Cushman and Wakefield about the current viability windows and the difficulties that there are in the market. So it is a constant factor, I'm afraid, and it's one that we're going to look at through a revised economic viability study that supports the Leeds local plan to really understand what the difficulties in the market are, and how we can secure the benefits that we'd like to through planning, and avoid the quite extensive viability discussions that seem to take up an awful lot of plans panel discussions.
Any follow-up?
I will follow up. I'd quite like somebody to look at what the numbers would be, if that's all right, because I think when we're sat around City Plans panel, for instance, or any other plans panel of your choosing, it would be quite good to know, when you're looking at it as one development at a time, it's quite easy to see them fly by. Okay, well, that one's offering 50 affordable houses rather than 60. Maybe that's okay. That one's offering 2 rather than 3. Maybe that's okay. But at the end of the year, it would be nice to say, through viability, or through the various bits, how much are we losing? And I think that gives members a choice, because, for instance, we may look at ones and say, as we have done in some, I would rather we put all of the Section 106 into the affordable housing on this one, rather than there be a transport Section 106 contribution if viability is a problem. So it's just that I completely know that it is possible for developers to come and say they've got a viability concern in bringing that, and I know that we're working on that. So thank you, Martin, for that extra bit on it. I think as members of plans panels, to be as informed as we can be, it'd be really useful just to know how much that's cost us overall in our affordable housing. Yes, absolutely, we can work on new policies, but when we start making those decisions, we'd quite like to know how firm we should be being on that as part of that position. Thank you.
Just coming back to the air quality, that Poole and Wharfdale still stands out like a sore thumb. Can someone actually give me an explanation, not you personally, but can you get arranged for an officer? Because they keep telling me when I raise this issue, oh, it's all right, councillor, we're not going to need to do anything. Well, residents think there is. There's massive development coming across. It's mainly caused by cars, not by anything else, but there's a whole lot of development coming across in North Yorkshire. Poole Bridge is one of the major places that you've got to come over, so that's going to exacerbate it. There's a major development going to be happening in Otley soon, so there's going to be increased movement in and around that bridge there. So we need to do something. We need to do something and put in place measures now, because we've got to go through Poole Main Street, and it's always held up by someone digging it up and causing mayhem all over the place, and in and around the Downley Arms.
Traffic calming.
Well, and if we are going to continue to develop, well, we are. Whenever we develop the industrial site beside the airport, that's going to have a significant impact on traffic movements of all types and sizes. So we need to get something done about that, because you've cleared away all the other ones. But Poole and Wharfdale, every time I ask, I get basically told straight back, well, there's nothing can be done, councillor.
Yeah, I don't know the specific details, as you're probably aware, because we get our information passed on from Clean Air Leeds. But what we can see is that it's been improving for the past 2 years. It just needs 2 more years and compliant data to be revoked, similarly to the other AQMAs. But even when it's revoked, that monitoring still occurs. So if it does need to become an air quality management area again, it will be done. So just because if it does get revoked, we will be monitoring it after.
Okay, but my other point was actually on Section 106 monies. I've got the highways officers in particular, and parts and countryside officers could spend the money tomorrow, but the problem is, not directly at my colleague on my left, but the problem is legal not renegotiating when money's left over. That it's left over, as you say, it was for purpose A. We don't need all of it. If it's not spent within a specific period of time, we've got to offer it back to the developer. Well, I've spoken to a number of the developers. They don't want to see the money again. They're not really that bothered about getting the money back again. They accepted that was part of the contract that when they got it built in the first place. They built that into their pricing structure. They've recovered the money through the sales that they've made. But if we could get a bit of flexibility, highways and parks could both use that money tomorrow in the areas, not even passing it to some other part of the city, even in those areas. But every time they keep asking for permission to do this, no, sorry, officer, particularly in highways, you can't do it. It's specifically for this purpose. So we need to maybe look at the way we write our Section 106 agreements, that if after a specific period of time, the developer allows the money just to be pooled and to be spent for that purpose, provided we've shown that it is no longer needed for. So I don't know but our legal department are very risk averse. They do not like taking risks. So all legal department. Well, maybe that's all legal department, but maybe we need to start pushing the envelope a bit to try and see if we can get the development community to work with us, because they give the impression that they're happy for the money to be spent. They're not looking to recover it. Is there anything we can do or not? I've been too harsh on you, Emma.
Yes, I think you are. I like to think we're pragmatic and reasonable and fair and not too risk averse, where we can take risks, but obviously protecting the council against risk as appropriate. We try to draft, and I think over the years have got better at drafting to the widest possible remit, and definitely that is always our starting point. Let's draft Section 106 obligations to spend as widely as possible, and so it gives flexibility. We try and also be firm on negotiations, so that's not narrowed and we're not pushed back. You know, we're not battened down to spending on just one road or just one set of traffic lights. Sometimes in drafting to get things over the line, we have to be reasonable and fair and negotiate on one point and you know, give and take between the parties when we're negotiating. We are, though, with the planning obligations, constrained by the tests in the SIL regulations and the guidance in PPG, which tells us the tests that planning obligations have to adhere to so that they are valid and legal. And that is that they are mostly related to the very specific development, and that we ask for them for that purpose. So that negates the extent to which we can say, well, within 5 years or 10 years, if we've not spent it on this, let's go and spend it on anything. Because if they were needed to ameliorate and mitigate adverse impacts of development in the first place and were therefore valid, we've asked for them for that reason and are having to spend them within the time frame for that reason. If we've not managed to spend it on a specific project that we needed it for, do you see that mitigates the impact? We can spend it elsewhere.
Specific parochial example. We lost a planning application in Poole, and an inspector made the decision at the end of the day, which meant that they imposed everything on us, to make a change to the roundabout just outside the White Hart pub. Highways have now come back and said categorically the work just cannot be done under any circumstances whatsoever. You just couldn't fit it in. You couldn't put all the roundabout there and keep everything as it is. So we wanted to use that money for crossings further down, and we're told categorically we couldn't do it. Spoke to Taylor Wimpey. They've got no problems whatsoever if the money was used for crossings further down towards where the development actually took place. Why the inspector decided to pick on this roundabout when it wasn't directly connected with the development in the first place was beyond me. But that's an example of where there's money sitting that would benefit the community. The parish council would welcome it. The police would welcome it as well. But we're hambound because it says specifically it's for a roundabout, which highways have confirmed you can't physically build.
Can I ask the question? Because this is obviously a conversation I'm sure several of us are having with our relevant officers in our own wards. Is there an ability, and I'm sure there's probably cost involved, where effectively we can renegotiate with the developer, assuming it still meets the test, to then change them? And what is that process? Because I think that's the thing we're not quite understanding is actually if the developer's happy for it and it sort of meets the test, but not quite the way we said, how do we get that changed?
And we do enter into those discussions between highways or parks and have that renegotiation, and we just vary. If they say they want to do it and we say, well, we want to do it, and then we do a deed of variation to vary it and get the money spent where it's more appropriate to be, or where it can actually be spent.
So then, in other words, based on what you've said, if highways ask you, you will do your best and renegotiate it. But highways are telling me that they ask legal advice on that they can't. Is it not something, not necessarily to debate here today, that we need to take this more strategically back to find out who is actually responsible for this hold up? Is it highways? Is it parks? Is it legal? And get a definitive solution and get the relevant exec members involved to try and bottom this out one way or the other. And then everybody's working off the same hymn sheet.
I'm happy to take that away, Councillor Anderson, and have those conversations.
Been slightly teased by cake coming into the room. All right, Councillor Stables next, please, and then I'll count.
Thank you. Coming back to pollution, I just wanted to ask a question around that because, like Otley, actually, the traffic congestion in Wetherby's got increasingly bad, and it's a big concern with a number of residents about air pollution in Wetherby. I wanted to ask, are we measuring, as well as nitrogen dioxide, are we also measuring particulates? And I don't see any data on this for Wetherby. How do I get hold of it?
Yeah, so we do measure for particulate matter. We've all monitoring sites that we do monitor, it has complied. I'm not too sure those exact sites where they are. At the top of my head, sorry, just looking through the report now. Because again, as I said earlier, so this is information we get passed on from Clean Air Leeds. I know they publish a report, a more detailed report than what we summarise here. So that data might be within there. That's also published each year, which so I'm not too sure on that. Sorry.
Can we have a link to that so
Yeah,
that we can look at it, please? That would be really helpful. And my other question, well, kind of question really, is around housing mix, which comes up as red as well. You know, and I just wondered what levers planning have got in order to try to improve the housing mix. So, for example, in Wetherby Ward, we've got an older than average population. We've got there is a big need for accommodation for older people, independent livings, apartments for older people, which would enable them to downsize and free up family homes. And it's basically because we don't have enough of older people's accommodation, there is a block in the system, which means that there are many individual people or couples living in big houses in Wetherby Ward who would happily downsize if those houses were there. And I'm sure across the city there will be similar examples. And I'm just wondering what levers we have to enable us to improve that situation.
I think you're right in highlighting that as a major issue, because you get delivery of the smaller units around the city centre and then larger units elsewhere. I think it's something we're looking through the local plan, the new local plan, and we've consulted on different options for how we might deliver a better mix on sites across the city. So I think that's the mechanism and the way we can hopefully improve that mix throughout the city through an improved and revised local plan policy.
So if a developer comes forward with a planning application and it either has zero older people living, or apartments in it, what can, I'm just wondering how much power, the council has to change that position, and how you do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, at the moment, we don't have a policy which requires older persons housing across all sites that come forward in Leeds. But we do have a policy that identifies some sites as being especially suitable for older persons housing. So if an application came forward on one of those sites, we could ask for market information as to why older persons housing wasn't being brought forward on that site. What we also have is a strategic housing market assessment that sets out a lot more clearly now what the needs for older persons housing are. They will be brought through the Leeds local plan, as Paul said, both in terms of policy, but also in terms of site requirements, particularly where there is a particular need for older persons housing in a particular part of the city. And as I think we've said before, where we're releasing housing land to meet needs in the outer areas, some of those needs are expressly for older persons housing. So it'd be perfectly appropriate for us to put a site requirement on those sites coming forward for older persons housing. That's not the way we currently do it. So it's a little bit more difficult, and we're reliant on what the market wants to bring forward. So we do have various older persons housing schemes come forward, but clearly not enough in your part of Leeds, Councillor Stables.
Thank you. So, am I right in thinking that you are, as part of the Leeds local plan, there will be a policy that is developed that will enable that to be more enforceable going forward? Right, thank you.
I was just going to raise my usual point about the district valuers' constraints when it comes to affordability. I think probably not today, Chair, because it's a well-known. It's well known that I believe that the district valuer is constrained when it comes to affordability, and that significant numbers of developers simply use the affordability excuse to avoid meeting policy.
Thank you. It was around the Section 106 issue. I mean, I was just going to bring in an example or two. We certainly do, or certainly across the council and the combined authority have renegotiated some, because I've been part of some of those discussions. What was really difficult is how specific the original requirement was. So, for instance, on one particular one, and I'll anonymise it a little bit so it's not the site, it required a half-an-hour bus to the city centre, for instance, which was an uplift in the service that was provided. But then an operator removed the original service. So it was impossible for that uplift funding to be used because there was no service there at all, for instance. So what do you do in that case? Because we've said there has to be a half-an-hour bus to the city centre from this particular site, but there isn't a bus hourly even for us to uplift. So then you have to go through and renegotiate that. To be honest, this site was near a train station. So what the point is was having a half an hourly bus to the city centre when you could have been at the train station within 10 minutes was beyond me. But I think because of how specific that was, it required us to renegotiate it with the developer. In fact, they were completely with us because they couldn't deliver what they had promised to do with the amount of money we'd asked from them. It was impossible for anyone to deliver. But had that been a more general requirement around connectivity to the site in general, rather than a half an hourly bus to the city centre, we'd have probably got something better from the beginning, and it would have been a more long-standing commitment. So it's just around some of those requests. Now, in fact, that one, I think on that one, the City Council had asked the Combined Authority what they would want, and the Combined Authority had given the specific requirement. So it wasn't that the council had thought we'd want this, but that's what the Combined Authority did. As we move into an area of bus franchising, improving all of the bus connectivity in the surrounding area is something that's possible to do with a contribution. But how do we get the contribution to have that to cover that much of a reach rather than just be a very specific service? I don't know, but that's just an example I've seen. Absolutely, they get renegotiated at certain times. That one probably because the developer couldn't meet what they needed to do. So I think probably they came to us in that case, but there have been other examples.
There's anything specific to answer to that one? Any other questions or comments about officers? Would officers like to clarify or add anything before we end this item?
Yeah, just to say thank you, Chair. Just to thank Jason and colleagues for pulling the report together, because this does take quite a lot of effort to work sort of cross council to get all this information together, and just to sort of comfort members that we do use a lot of the information in here to inform the Leeds local plan, and also bring it to bear in terms of planning application decisions as well, very much in kind of the plan, monitor, manage approach, and where we see a direction of travel in terms of one of these indicators not actually going in the direction that we'd like it to go, look to how actually to compensate for that and improve that. And the discussion we've had today has certainly given us plenty to think about in terms of how we might look to sort of action some of those changes. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Item number 9, to note the date and the time of the next meeting is yet to be confirmed, but dates and times for the 2026-27 municipal year are under consideration and will be provided in due course. And that concludes the business of today's meeting. Thank you for your attendance and contributions. I now declare the meeting closed.